The night of my son's 40th birthday party, I sat in the second row of Greater Faith Baptist Church's fellowship hall and watched a woman stand at a microphone and tell 200 people that I didn't belong there. She didn't say it that way, of course. Vanessa never said anything that way. She had a gift for wrapping poison in ribbon and calling it a present. What she said was this: Derek and I want to thank everyone who came tonight, especially those who are here for Derek, not for other reasons. And then she looked at me. Just for a second. Just long enough. I was holding my speech in my hands. 3 weeks I had spent writing it. 3 weeks of drafts and revisions and reading it aloud in my kitchen to the empty chair across the table, imagining Derek sitting there the way he used to when he was 12 years old, and I was helping him with homework, and we were just two people who loved each other without any conditions attached. I folded the paper, folded it again, smaller, put it in my purse. Nobody at the table next to me asked if I was all right. Pastor Elijah glanced over, quick, careful, and then looked away. Beverly Thornton, sitting at the table across from mine, leaned toward her husband Ray and said something I couldn't hear. I sat up straight. I drank the rest of my water. I kept my face exactly where I needed it to be. That was the last time I said nothing. Let me tell you who I was before I tell you what happened. Because you need to know. You need to understand the full weight of what was laid on that table before you can understand why I chose to pick it up instead of walk away from it. My name is Sonia Washington. I am 63 years old. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, the second of 5 children, to a man who wired houses for a living and a woman who spent 30 years doing the night shift at Memorial Health. We were not wealthy, but we were never confused about our worth, and my mother made certain of that distinction every single day. She used to say, "Sonia, poor is a bank account, small is a choice." I chose early that I would not be small. I attended Spelman College on a full academic scholarship, graduated in 1983 with a degree in English education, summa cum laude, in a white dress and my grandmother's pearl earrings, while my mother cried in the 4th row, and my father took photographs with a camera he'd borrowed from a neighbor because ours had broken the month before, and he refused to miss a single shot. I began teaching at Westside High School in Atlanta in the fall of 1984. I taught there for 35 years. 35 years. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 35 years of first-period English on Monday mornings when the students came in still half asleep and smelling like whatever they'd eaten for breakfast. 35 years of summer reading lists and red pens and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from caring deeply about people who are still learning how to care about themselves. 35 years of phone calls to parents who didn't want to hear hard things, and phone calls to parents who were too tired to hear anything at all, and the slow, patient work of trying to put something real into young people before the world got to them. In 35 years, I taught more than 3,000 students. I remember most of their names. In 2009, I was named Georgia Teacher of the Year. The award came with a check for $5,000. I used every penny of it to build out the classroom library. 600 new books, organized by genre, shelved alphabetically, labeled with little color-coded stickers I made myself one Saturday afternoon while listening to Aretha Franklin on the radio. I did not keep a single dollar. When people asked me why, I said, because the books will still be there after I'm gone, and I won't. I retired in June of 2019. My colleagues threw me a farewell gathering that 400 people attended. Former students came from as far as Houston, Seattle, and once, and this still makes me smile, from Nairobi, Kenya, where a boy named Darnell Johnson had gone to work with an international development organization and flew home specifically to shake my hand and say thank you for making him read Their Eyes Were Watching God his junior year, even though he'd complained about it every single day. I cried exactly twice that evening, both times in the bathroom, alone, so nobody would feel obligated to comfort me. I had learned to keep my private things private. It took a long time to understand that this habit, like most habits formed for good reasons, could also become a trap. The house on Briarwood Lane in Decatur had been mine since 2001. My ex-husband, Gerald, left when Derek was 12. He didn't leave badly. There was no dramatic scene, no screaming, no slamming of doors. He just stopped coming home on time, and then stopped coming home altogether. And one morning I woke up and understood that I had been living alone for 6 months while still technically being married. I filed the papers myself, signed them on a Tuesday, went to work on Wednesday and taught 3 classes back-to-back without mentioning it to a single colleague. The house was mine in the divorce, The mortgage was mine, too. Every payment of it for 18 years on a teacher's salary, supplemented by tutoring sessions I ran on Tuesday and Thursday evenings from my dining room table. I paid it off in November of 2019, 5 months after I retired. I sat at my kitchen table that night with a small glass of bourbon and Aretha on the radio and the final payment receipt in my hand, and I felt something I can only describe as the particular peace of a woman who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. 3 bedrooms, a covered porch in the back, a kitchen I knew by heart, where the light fell in the mornings, which burner ran hot, which cabinet door stuck in the humidity of August. 23 years of living in the same 4 walls, and I had made every inch of it mine. When Derek came home for Sunday dinners, he sat in the same chair he'd sat in since he was a boy. When I made his birthday cake, I used the same pan I'd used every year since 1985. The house remembered him the way houses remember the people who grew up in them. In the scuff on the baseboard at the end of the hallway, the height measurements penciled on the door frame in the back bedroom that I had never painted over. I would never have painted over them. I want you to understand that about me. I would never have painted over them. Derek met Vanessa in the spring of 2018 at a charity gala downtown. She was 31 years old, worked in marketing for a real estate firm, and had the kind of effortless elegance that takes considerable effort to maintain. She was beautiful. She was confident. She laughed easily and spoke well and knew how to make a room feel like it was built around her. I tried. I want to be clear about this. I tried. I took her shopping on a Saturday in October 2018, just the 2 of us, and let her pick the restaurant for lunch, and listened for 3 hours while she talked about her childhood in Charlotte, and her plans for Derek, and her ideas about what their future would look like. I asked questions. I was interested. I paid for lunch without being asked. I learned to make quinoa. I'm a black woman from Savannah, Georgia. My mother made grits. Her mother made grits. The concept of quinoa as a meal was for me a genuine philosophical stretch, but I learned it. I made it when Vanessa came to dinner. I made it without being asked and without mentioning the effort it represented. She married Derek in September of 2020. A small ceremony. COVID had shrunk the guest list to 15 people. I wore a pale blue dress. I sat in the front row. I did not cry. I smiled for every photograph and meant every smile. After the wedding, the small things began. Mother Sonia, I know a wonderful decorator. Your living room is a little dark, don't you think? Mother Sonia, are you sure about that blouse? I'm only asking. Mother Sonia, Derek mentioned you call a lot. I just thought you should know. Each comment arrived wrapped in the language of concern. Soft-voiced, well-meaning, technically deniable. The kind of thing you cannot object to directly without sounding brittle or oversensitive. The kind of thing that, repeated often enough, begins to reshape how you move through a space, making you smaller, more careful, more apologetic for simply existing. Derek said nothing. When I mentioned once, carefully, gently, that some of Vanessa's comments had landed strangely, he smiled the way he'd been smiling for 2 years and said, "Me? Don't make this into something. She's just trying." I looked at my son and recognized something I had seen many times in 35 years of teaching. A person who has chosen, for reasons of their own, not to see what is directly in front of them. I did not argue. I went home. I thought about it. The first red flag I should have understood came in March of 2023. I came to visit on a Sunday afternoon and noticed that the framed photograph in Derek's front hallway, the one from Christmas 1998, 3 generations, my mother in the center, Derek on her lap, my sisters on either side, all of us laughing at something my Uncle Roy had said just before the shutter clicked, had been replaced with an abstract canvas in shades of charcoal and cream. "Where's the family photo?" I asked. "Vanessa's reorganizing," Derek said. "It's around somewhere." I drove home. I did not call for 2 weeks. That silence, sitting with the feeling rather than speaking it, was my first instinct, and I had been living by it for so long that I mistook it for wisdom. It wasn't. It was accommodation dressed up as patience, and there is a difference between the two, though it took me until my 63rd year to learn it. The second red flag came later that spring when I overheard Vanessa on the phone in Derek's kitchen speaking to someone I didn't know. "Oh, she means well, she's just... You know how older women get when they start losing their relevance? It's sad, really." I was standing 6 feet away. She hadn't heard me come in. I took my coat back off the hook, left without going in. Sat in my car in the driveway for 4 minutes. then drove home. I did not call Derek that evening. I did not call the following morning either. I sat with it instead, the way I sat with most things, turning it over and examining it from every angle, looking for the place where I might have misunderstood, where I might have been uncharitable, where my reaction might be the problem rather than the cause. I found no such place, but I said nothing, because I was still operating by the old rules. Keep your private things private. Handle your own fires. Don't create conflict over something you can't prove. I was a 62-year-old woman with 35 years of earned wisdom, and I was making myself smaller every week in the home of my only child, and calling it grace. September 14th, 2024. Derek's 40th birthday party. Greater Faith Baptist Church Fellowship Hall. The hall I had helped paint in 2008 when the congregation raised money for renovations. The hall where I had taught Sunday school for 11 years. The hall where, in 1997, I had stood at the back during my first service as a new member, not knowing a soul, and Pastor Elijah, young then, only 30, new himself, had walked over and said, "Welcome. This is your home now, too." 200 guests, black and gold everything, Georgia Tech colors, Derek's colors, flower arrangements on every table, white roses and sunflowers, a DJ in the corner, a photo booth with props near the back wall, a buffet catered by the restaurant Derek and Vanessa used for every occasion now, the kind of place with small portions and large prices and food that looks beautiful on Instagram and tastes like it knows it. I arrived at 6:15 in a dress I had bought specifically for this evening. Navy blue, simple, fitted, exactly what the occasion required. My mother's gold earrings, the small leather purse I'd carried to every significant event for 20 years. I had my speech folded in the inside pocket. My table was in the second row, beside the window, not the front row. I noticed this when I sat down and said nothing about it, because I was still, at that point, giving the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it was a mistake. Perhaps the seating had just worked out that way. I know now that nothing about that evening had just worked out anyway. The first thing that happened was small. Guests arriving, moving through the hall, the easy noise of 200 people who know each other. A woman I didn't recognize, early 40s, bright smile, clearly a friend of Vanessa's from work, passed by my table and said to Vanessa, who was standing nearby, "Is that Derek's mom?" And Vanessa, without missing a beat, without a flicker of hesitation, "Yes, she likes to sit alone." I had not said I liked to sit alone. I had never said that to anyone. I was a woman who had spent 35 years in a room full of young people by choice. I do not like to sit alone. But the woman nodded and moved on, and that was the story she carried with her for the rest of the evening, and perhaps for the rest of her knowledge of me. I noted it. I said nothing. The photographs came next. The photographer gathered the family for a portrait around 6:45. I heard "Family, come on up," and stood from my chair. Vanessa turned, saw me moving, and said with the smile she kept calibrated to a frequency just below reproach, "Oh, Mother Sonia, he wants to do our side first. Just give us a minute." Our side. As though the family had sides, as though I were an addendum. I sat back down. The photographer shot 7 frames of Derek, Vanessa, Vanessa's parents, Vanessa's brother and sister-in-law. 7, laughing, rearranging, trying different configurations. I watched from my chair. Derek came to find me afterward. "Me, come on, let's get one quick." One quick, as though it were an obligation to be discharged rather than a moment to be made. We took 2 photographs. I smiled for both of them. The video tribute ran at 7:55, 10 minutes, professionally edited, music and transitions and the works. I watched it on the screen they'd set up at the front of the room. There was Derek at Georgia Tech, Derek at his first job, Derek and Vanessa on their first vacation, Derek and Vanessa at their wedding, Derek and Vanessa's anniversary dinner, Vanessa's parents at a cookout, Vanessa's brother at a football game. There was one photograph of Derek as a child. One. It was taken from a distance and slightly out of focus, and I did not recognize which album it had come from, and his face in it was partly turned away from the camera. There was no photograph of the 2 of us at Disneyland. The trip I had saved for through 2 years of Tuesday and Thursday tutoring sessions, the trip I had planned for 6 months, and not told him about until the morning of because I wanted to see his face when he found out. He was 15. He stood in the airport with his backpack and his eyes went wide and he grabbed me in a hug that lifted me half off the ground, which at 15 he could already do, and he said, me, "You're serious?" And I said, "I have never been more serious about anything." And we laughed all the way through security. No photograph from that trip. No photograph from his high school graduation, where he walked across the stage and looked for me in the crowd before he looked at anyone else. No photograph from the morning he left for college, when I stood in the driveway of this house in Decatur and watched his taillights disappear around the corner, and then went inside and cried for 45 minutes, and made myself a cup of tea and said out loud to the empty kitchen, "Well, you did that right." Beverly Thornton looked across at me during the video. Our eyes met. Hers held something. Recognition, discomfort, the particular expression of someone watching something happen that they will choose not to name. She looked away first. The speeches began at 8:30. Vanessa's parents, her brother, a friend from Georgia Tech, each one warm, specific, full of affection, each one earning real laughter and real applause. Then Vanessa stepped back to the microphone and looked at her list. "And we have one more person, Aunt Dorothy, Sonia's sister." I sat up. Dorothy came to the microphone. She looked at me. A look I knew from 57 years of sisterhood. A look that said, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," in a language only the two of us shared. And she said something brief and kind about Derek, and then sat down. My name was not called. I had written 300 words about my son. I had spent 3 weeks on them. I had practiced reading them aloud at my kitchen table. I had brought the paper in my purse. And then Vanessa moved back to the microphone for the final time, and everything that came before became prologue. "Derek and I want to thank everyone who came tonight," she said. Her voice was warm. Her posture was perfect. Her smile landed exactly where she intended it. "Especially those who are here for Derek, not for other reasons." The pause, the look, 1 second, calibrated, public, undeniable. Sometimes real love means knowing when to let go. Scattered applause, people clapping because silence would have been more uncomfortable, because the room needed something to do with the moment, because 200 people had just witnessed something and not one of them had a word for it yet. Pastor Elijah cleared his throat. Ray Thornton set down his glass. Dorothy stared at her hands. Derek stood beside his wife. He was smiling, slightly. The smile of a man who has decided, a long time ago, that a certain kind of blindness is easier than a certain kind of seeing. He did not look at me. I finished my water. I ate the last of the food on my plate. I stood up when it was time to leave, and I made my way around the room, and I shook hands and said the right things, and asked Beverly how Ray's knee was doing after the surgery, and complimented the flowers, and said goodnight to Pastor Elijah, and thanked the catering staff. And when I reached Derek, I took his hand in both of mine. Not a hug, a handshake, deliberate. "Happy birthday, baby." That was all. In the car, driving home, I did not turn on the radio. 23 minutes of road and dark, and the quiet particular to a woman who has just decided something but has not yet put words to what it is. The speech was still in my purse, folded small. I got home at 10:47, sat in my kitchen without turning on the lights. The street lamp outside the window threw a stripe of pale gold across the table, and I sat in it and let myself be still. Dorothy called at 11:15. I looked at the screen, let it ring, sent her a text. "I'm fine, talk soon." I wasn't ready to talk to anyone yet. Not because I was falling apart, because I was thinking. And when I am thinking, really thinking, the way I used to think before I planned the big moves in my classroom, before I designed the lesson that I knew was going to change something in a student who didn't know yet they needed changing, I need quiet. I need to be the only person in the room. I made tea. I sat back down. I took the speech out of my purse and opened it in the stripe of light from the window. Read it through once, all the way to the end. "Derek, you are the reason I understand that loving someone means teaching them not to need you anymore." And then wondering why the room feels empty. I folded it again, carefully, put it in the kitchen drawer, the one where I kept important things I wasn't ready to deal with yet. Then I went to my bedroom, opened the nightstand, took out the envelope where I kept the house documents. Deed, insurance, tax assessments, the refinancing papers from 2007, the final mortgage receipt from November 2019. I read through them slowly, the way I used to read student essays, looking for what was really being said beneath what was written. And I found the thing I had not let myself look at directly in 3 years. In 2021, Derek had asked me, twice, then a third time, to add his name to the deed, just so I can look after you if anything happens me. Each time Vanessa had been present. Each time her face had been perfectly professionally neutral. Each time something in me had said no. I had not known exactly why. I had felt faintly ashamed of the instinct, as though suspecting my own child of anything were a moral failing on my part. I set the papers on the bed, looked at the ceiling. All right then, 2 words. And from that moment, everything had a direction. I woke at 6 the next morning, made oatmeal, drank my coffee standing at the kitchen window, watching the neighborhood come alive the way it did every day. The Hendersons' dog pulling hard toward the elm at the corner, Mrs. Patterson's newspaper still in the driveway, the yellow school bus making its first run just after 6:30. Normal, ordinary, mine. I got my small notebook from the drawer beside the refrigerator, the kind I had used for 35 years to plan lessons, blue cover, college ruled, the kind you can find at any drugstore. I sat down at the table. I did not write feelings. I wrote a list. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, because the feelings were not the point. The feelings could wait. The list was what mattered now. I had spent 35 years turning complicated problems into manageable steps. Curriculum design, crisis intervention, difficult conversations with difficult parents. Every one of them came down to the same basic discipline. Define the problem clearly. Identify what you actually control. Move in order. I was 63 years old, and I had spent the last 3 years being managed, maneuvered, and quietly erased from my own son's life. I was done being managed. I wrote 2 words at the top of the first page. Step 1, and then I began. The notebook sat on the table in front of me, open to the first page. The words, Step 1, written at the top in my own handwriting. I looked at them for a long time. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes after a long period of confusion. Not the dramatic clarity of movies, not a lightning bolt or a sudden revelation, but something quieter and more durable. The clarity of a woman who has been telling herself a story that no longer holds together, and who has finally, at 63 years old, decided to stop telling it. The story I had been telling myself went something like this. Family is complicated. Derek loves you even when he doesn't show it. Vanessa is difficult, but she means well. Don't make things worse. Keep the peace. Be the bigger person. Be patient. Be understanding. Be smaller. I had been telling that story for 3 years, and the night of September 14th, 2024, sitting in the second row of a fellowship hall I had helped paint in 2008, watching my son stand beside the woman who had just publicly implied I didn't belong there, watching him smile and say nothing, the story had finally run out of road. Not because of what Vanessa said. I had heard worse from Vanessa in less public settings. Because of what Derek didn't say. That was the thing I sat with in my dark kitchen. The thing I turned over and examined from every angle. The silence of a 40-year-old man who watched his mother be diminished in front of 200 people and chose, in that moment, not to speak. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. Anger is hot, and it burns fast, and it makes you move before you're ready. What I felt was colder than anger and more lasting. It was the feeling of a woman who has finally seen something she cannot unsee, and who has decided that seeing it clearly is more useful than pretending otherwise. All right then, I closed the notebook. I would not write the list tonight. Tonight I needed to simply let the clarity settle, the way you let a room settle after the furniture has been rearranged. Walking through it slowly, adjusting to the new distances between things. I washed my teacup, dried it, put it back on the shelf. I went to bed at 12:30 and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a woman who has made a decision, even if she hasn't yet made all the choices that follow from it. Dorothy called again in the morning. This time I answered. We met at Lena's, the diner on Commerce Drive where we had been meeting since 1994, the place where the coffee was never quite hot enough, and the biscuits were always exactly right, and the corner booth in the back had absorbed more of our conversations than I could count. 30 years of Sunday mornings and difficult Tuesdays and the particular kind of talk that only happens when you've known someone since they were 6 years old and scared of thunderstorms. Dorothy slid into the booth across from me, already wearing the expression I knew from a lifetime of shared history. The look that said, I know I did something, and I'm not entirely sure how bad it is yet. She was 58, 4 years younger than me, still wearing her hair natural the way she had since the 90s, still with the same reading glasses she kept on top of her head even when she didn't need them. She looked like our mother in the eyes and our father around the mouth, and on the mornings when I missed them most, sitting across from Dorothy was the closest thing I had to having them back. "Sonia," she started. "Don't apologize yet," I said. "I need you to talk first. I need to hear what you saw." She looked at me carefully. "What do you mean?" "I mean the last 3 years. Whatever you've noticed, whatever you've heard, whatever you've been storing up because you didn't know what to do with it." Dorothy wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She was quiet for a moment, and I watched her making the decision. The small, visible calculation of a woman deciding whether honesty is safe. I waited. I didn't push. I had learned decades ago that pushing people toward truth only makes them protect it harder. "The thing at the birthday party," she finally said. I should have said something. "I know. Tell me the rest." And she did. It came slowly at first, then faster, the way water moves once you clear the thing that was blocking it. She told me about a Sunday last spring when she'd run into Vanessa's friend Keisha at a baby shower, and Keisha had said with genuine sympathy that she'd heard Sonia was having some memory issues. And when Dorothy had asked what she meant, Keisha had said Vanessa had mentioned it in passing at their last girls' night. I had no memory issues. I had never had a memory issue in my life. I remembered the names of every student I had taught for 15 years without looking at a roster. I did the crossword every morning in pen. Dorothy told me about a Wednesday evening the previous October when she'd called Derek's house and overheard, because Vanessa had accidentally put the phone on speaker instead of hold. Vanessa telling someone that Sonia won't let go. It's actually becoming a problem. Derek's going to have to do something about it soon. She told me about a conversation at Greater Faith's Women's Luncheon in February, where Vanessa had mentioned to 3 women in earshot of Dorothy that caring for an aging parent was such a weight on a marriage, and that Derek handles it so graciously. I was 62 years old and in excellent health and did not require caring for. I drove myself everywhere. I cooked my own meals. I paid my own bills. I had run a classroom of 30 teenagers on my own authority for 35 years. Caring for an aging parent. I wrote nothing down at the diner. I just listened. I let Dorothy talk until she had emptied everything she'd been holding, and then I sat with all of it for a moment, and then I said, "I need you to remember all of this clearly. Not for right now. For later." "Later when?" "When I ask you." Dorothy looked at me with the expression that meant she was recalibrating. She had known me long enough to understand that when I got quiet and specific, something was already in motion. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to do what I always did when a student had been cheating," I said. "Document everything, then wait for the right moment to make it undeniable." Dorothy picked up her biscuit. "Lord," she said, not to me and not entirely to the Lord. Lord have mercy. I had been retired for 5 years, but I had never lost the habit of the lesson plan. Before I did anything else, I sat down with a blank notebook, a fresh one, not the one on my kitchen table, a new one I bought specifically for this, and I wrote at the top of the first page, what do I actually know? What do I need to know? What do I want to happen? 3 questions. The same 3 questions I had asked at the beginning of every significant unit I'd ever designed. You cannot build towards something you haven't named. You cannot protect what you haven't mapped. I spent 2 days just writing. Not planning yet. Writing. Getting everything out of my memory and onto the page, where I could see it without the distortion of emotion. Every comment Vanessa had made in my presence. Every instance of Derek's silence. Every time I had been seated at the wrong table, called at the wrong time, introduced in the wrong way, looked at with that particular measuring look that said how much longer. By the end of the second day, I had 11 pages. I read them through once, the way I used to read a student's first draft. Not to judge it, but to find the pattern underneath the surface. And the pattern was not hard to find. It was a slow, patient, methodical dismantling, not of my feelings. Feelings were not the target. The target was my credibility, my reliability, my relevance. The story Vanessa was building, carefully and over time, was the story of a woman becoming a problem, a woman losing her grip, a woman whose presence in her son's life was, at best, a sentimental inconvenience, and at worst, an obstacle to his future. And if that story became the accepted story, if it settled into place the way these stories do, quietly, through repetition, through the accumulation of small suggestions planted in the right ears. Then the next chapter wrote itself. An aging woman, memory issues, cannot manage her affairs. Her son only wants what's best for her. Perhaps the house should. I stopped writing. I sat at my kitchen table and felt something move through me that was not quite fear and not quite anger, but was the cold, clarifying cousin of both. Then I picked up the phone and called Ronald Briggs. Ronald Briggs had an office on Commerce Drive in Decatur, 2 blocks from the diner where I'd had breakfast with Dorothy. I'd been given his name by a colleague, a woman I'd taught alongside for 20 years who had used him in a property dispute with her ex-husband's family and described him as the kind of man who reads everything twice and never raises his voice and wins anyway. His office was on the 3rd floor of a modest building, the kind of building that makes no particular impression and probably intends it that way. The waiting room had good lighting and bad art and the particular quiet of a place where people came to solve problems they'd been avoiding. His receptionist, a young woman named Tanya who had the organized calm of someone who has seen everything, offered me water and told me he'd be with me in 5 minutes. He was with me in 4. Ronald Briggs was in his late 60s, gray at the temples, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead in a way that reminded me irresistibly of Dorothy. He had the kind of face that had clearly been handsome in its youth and had traded that for something better. A face that had been worn into trustworthiness by years of careful attention to other people's problems. He stood when I came in, which I noticed. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, which was not a power move but a courtesy, and those are different things and I know the difference. I set my folder on the desk in front of him. Deed, insurance, tax assessments, the mortgage receipt from 2019, and I said, I want to know exactly where I stand legally before I do anything else. He put on his glasses and looked through the documents without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. I sat and let him read. I did not fill the silence. I have learned that most people are afraid of silence and will say things to fill it that they would not otherwise say. Ronald Briggs, I noted, was not afraid of silence either. We understood each other without discussing it. Finally, he looked up. You own this property outright. No liens, no co-owners, no encumbrances of any kind. You have full and sole legal authority over it. And if I wanted to change something, update my estate documents, add or remove provisions? Entirely your right, entirely your decision. No one else's signature required. I nodded. There's something else. I told him about the 3 requests Derek had made to add his name to the deed. I told him about the lawyer inquiry, the one Dorothy had heard about through a friend, about the incapacity proceedings, whatever they called it, the process by which a family member could petition to manage the affairs of a person deemed no longer capable. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Do you have any documentation of that inquiry? Not yet, but I know where to look. If you can get dates and the name of the firm, I can verify the inquiry through the public record. These things leave traces. I know, I said. Everything leaves traces. That's what I've been counting on. He looked at me over his glasses for a moment. Mrs. Washington, how long have you been planning this visit? Since September 15th. Of this year? Yes. That's 3 weeks. I'm a methodical person. He almost smiled. I can see that. He made a note. I'd like you to bring me everything you have. Written, recorded, documented in any form. We'll build a picture. And then we'll discuss your options. I already know my options, I said. I want to discuss strategy. This time he did smile. The trace was not difficult to find. A week of careful, patient searching. The kind of searching I had done when I suspected a student of plagiarism, methodical and unhurried, following the small inconsistencies until they converged on the truth. I had kept every text message Derek had ever sent me, going back to 2017, because I was the kind of woman who kept things. I had never thought I would need them for this, but I had them. In March of 2022, there was a gap in Derek's texts. 4 days where he had not responded to messages I'd sent, which was unusual for him. When he responded on the 5th day, his message was oddly formal. Hey me, sorry for the slow reply. Things have been busy. How are you? Exactly the kind of message someone writes when they feel slightly guilty about something. I made a note of the dates. I asked a former colleague, a woman who had moved into legal work after retirement, a casual question about how one would find out if a particular law firm had been contacted about a particular type of proceeding. She walked me through the public record process without asking why I was asking. 2 days later, I had the name, Holloway and Price, an estate law firm in Buckhead. I passed it to Briggs. He verified it within a week. October to March of 2022, he told me on the phone. Multiple consultations. They were asking about the grounds for a competency petition in Georgia, what evidence would be required, what the timeline would look like. No petition was ever filed. Because I said no to the deed transfer the third time, I said. And they decided to wait. That's a reasonable interpretation. It's the only interpretation that makes sense of everything else. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Washington, what exactly are you preparing for? I'm preparing for a situation in which someone might try to tell a court, or a church, or a community that I am not in full possession of my faculties. I want to make that argument so thoroughly impossible that no sane attorney would take the case. And separately, I continued, I want to make sure that when the full picture becomes clear to the people who need to see it, it becomes clear in the right place at the right time, in a way that cannot be walked back. The right place being the same room where I was humiliated, in front of the same people who saw it happen. Another pause. You have a specific event in mind. Greater Faith Baptist holds its annual community celebration on December 7th. I was nominated for the Community Pillar Award before any of this happened. 300 people attend. It's streamed on YouTube. And your daughter-in-law? She volunteered to help coordinate. The committee accepted. I could hear Briggs thinking on the other end of the line. You let her volunteer, he said slowly. I didn't stop her, I said. There's a difference. October moved through Atlanta in its particular way. The heat finally loosening its grip, the light going golden and long in the late afternoons, the neighborhood smelling of cut grass and something faintly like wood smoke from someone, somewhere, burning leaves. I did my work quietly, updated my will, left the house to the Sonia Washington Educational Endowment at Spelman College, a scholarship fund for first-generation students studying education, which Briggs helped me establish in a single afternoon. The bequest was ironclad. Any challenge to it on grounds of incapacity would trigger an automatic transfer of all assets to Greater Faith Baptist. I added that clause myself. Briggs said it was unusual. I said that was the point. I gathered the text messages, 73 pages of them, printed and organized chronologically, every request for money from Derek going back to 2020. There were 47 individual transactions. The total, when I added it up, was $47,000. I had done it willingly, every time, because he was my son, and I did not keep score when it came to my son. But I kept records. I had always kept records. 35 years of gradebooks and attendance sheets and parent communication logs. The habit of documentation was too deep to abandon just because the subject had become personal. I did not intend to ask for the money back. Money was not the point. The point was the full picture. The picture of a woman who had given and given and given again. Her home, her money, her patience, her silence, and received in exchange a slow, deliberate erasure. I met with Beverly Thornton for coffee in early November. Beverly was uncomfortable. She had been uncomfortable since September 14th. I could see it in the way she'd been texting me careful, neutral messages, the messages of a woman maintaining a connection she wasn't sure how to characterize. I liked Beverly. I had known her for 14 years. I thought she was a fundamentally decent person who had, at a critical moment, chosen discomfort over courage. I understood that choice. I had made it myself, many times. I was not making it anymore. We sat at her kitchen table and I let her talk for a while, and then I said, Beverly, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. She set down her cup. All right. What did you see on September 14th? The discomfort moved across her face like weather. Sonia, I'm not asking you to take a side. I'm asking what you observed. As a witness, as someone who was in the room. Beverly looked at her hands. Then she looked at me, and she told me what she had heard, what she had seen, the comment about real love, the look, Derek's silence, the way the room had felt. I should have said something, she said. Right then, I should have said something. You should have, I agreed without cruelty. But you didn't, and that's over. What matters now is whether you'd be willing to say it in a different setting. She looked up. What kind of setting? A formal one, if it came to that. Beverly was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. Yes, she said, if it came to that. The last week of November, I sat at my kitchen table with everything laid out in front of me. The folder for Briggs, the updated will, notarized and filed, the timeline, 11 pages of it, dating back to the first comment Vanessa had made in my presence in 2021. Dorothy's account, written down and signed. Beverly's, the text messages, 73 pages. The documentation of the Holloway and Price consultations. And one more thing. Georgia is a one-party consent state, which means that if you are part of a conversation, you may record it without telling the other party. I had learned this not from Briggs, but from a former student, a young woman named Alicia, who had gone to law school and sent me a card every year on Teacher Appreciation Day without fail. I had called Alicia in October, framed it as a hypothetical, and she had explained the law clearly, and without asking why a retired English teacher needed to know it. In October, Vanessa had called to discuss Thanksgiving arrangements. During that call, her voice carrying the particular smooth warmth it always carried when she was delivering something designed to destabilize me. Mother Sonia, I just think you should be thinking about the future. You don't want the house to become a burden for Derek down the road. There are some really lovely communities, really vibrant, active senior communities that I think you'd genuinely enjoy. I'm just thinking about what's best for you. The recording was 4 minutes and 17 seconds long. Briggs listened to it in his office. Admissible, he said. And damning. I put the recording in the folder. Then I called Pastor Elijah and asked for a private meeting. He was in his office at the church the following Tuesday morning. He looked slightly uncertain when I sat down, the expression of a man who suspects he is about to be held accountable for something and is not quite sure for what. I told him everything, not to ask for his sympathy, because I needed him to understand what was about to happen in his church, in his fellowship hall, and why, and because I needed him to know before anyone else told him a different version of the story. When I finished, Pastor Elijah sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, Sonia, I'm ashamed I looked away that night. I know, I said. So am I, but looking away is over. He nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Just let the evening go as planned. The award, the program, my speech. Let it go exactly as planned. And after? After will take care of itself, I said. That's what preparation is for. The formal notice went out from Briggs's office on December 5th, 2 days before the community celebration, delivered to Derek and Vanessa through Elena Torres, the attorney they had quietly retained in October, according to Briggs's network of professional courtesies. The notice was precise and complete. Documentation of the 2022 competency inquiry. Documentation of the $47,000 in loans. The recorded phone call. Dorothy's written account. Beverly's statement. A clear, unambiguous communication that any future legal action related to Sonia Washington's capacity or property would be met with the full weight of this documented record. Briggs told me Vanessa's attorney received it on the afternoon of December 5th. That was why, when Vanessa walked into Greater Faith Baptist on the evening of December 7th with a clipboard in her hand and an earpiece in one ear and her face arranged in its most controlled expression, she already knew. She already knew what I had. She already knew what was coming. She just didn't know exactly when. December 7th, 2024, 5:30 in the evening. I arrived before anyone else. I had planned it that way. The parking lot was still mostly empty. A few cars belonging to the setup crew, Pastor Elijah's black Buick in its usual spot near the side entrance, the catering van backed up to the kitchen door. The sky over Atlanta was the particular deep blue of early December evenings, cold and clear and very high, the kind of sky that makes the city below it look small and purposeful at the same time. I sat in my car for 3 minutes before I went in, not from hesitation, from the same reason I used to sit outside my classroom door for 3 minutes before the first bell, to let the quiet settle in, to feel the weight of what was about to happen and make sure I was ready to carry it. I was ready. I had spent 6 days on what I was going to wear. That might sound like vanity. It was not vanity. It was strategy. Presentation is communication, and I had been communicating the wrong things for 3 years. Apologetic things, diminished things, I'm sorry for taking up space things. Tonight I was communicating something else entirely. The dress was red, deep, true red, the color of conviction, the color that announces arrival. I had owned it for 2 years and never worn it because I had always thought it was too much. Tonight, too much was exactly right. I had bought new shoes, low-heeled black pumps, practical and sharp, my mother's gold earrings, the small leather purse with everything inside it that mattered. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror once. Not for approval, for confirmation. There you are, I thought. There she is. I went inside. The fellowship hall was being arranged when I entered. Round tables going out, centerpieces being set, the sound system running its test tones in the background. 2 young women from the decorating committee looked up when I came in. One of them, a girl I recognized from the youth choir, broke into a wide smile. "Ms. Washington, you look amazing." "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "How can I help?" She blinked, slightly surprised. She had not expected me to offer, which told me something about the reputation that had been built around me in this community without my knowledge. Sonia Washington, the woman who sits alone and doesn't engage. I filed that away. "We're good, I think. Just finishing up." "Then I'll stay out of your way." I found the head of the catering setup in the kitchen and asked how things were going. I talked to the sound technician about the microphone levels. I spoke with the woman arranging the program booklets, a retired school teacher named June, who had been a member of Greater Faith almost as long as I had, and we stood together for 10 minutes discussing the change in weather and her granddaughter's college applications, and whether the pecan pie would hold up under the warming lights. Normal, unhurried, present. This was also strategy. The narrative Vanessa had built, the "she likes to sit alone, she doesn't really engage, she's become a bit difficult" narrative, required me to behave in a particular way, to be peripheral, to occupy the edges. I was not going to do that tonight. Tonight, every person in this building was going to see, before anything else happened, a woman who was fully at home here, a woman who belonged, a woman who had been belonging here for 27 years and intended to keep doing so. By 6 o'clock, I had spoken to 14 people. I knew all of their names and most of their circumstances. I asked after the people I knew to be unwell. I remembered the things people had mentioned in passing at previous events. A grandbaby due in February, a son finishing his PhD, a kitchen renovation that had been a source of ongoing domestic drama for 8 months. People are moved when they discover they have been remembered. It costs nothing to remember people. I had known this since I was 23 years old, and it had never once failed me. At 6:15, Beverly and Ray Thornton came in. Beverly saw me from across the room, and I watched the sequence of emotions move through her face in rapid succession. Surprise at my early arrival, recognition of the red dress, something that might have been relief. She crossed to me directly, without the tentative navigation I might have expected from a woman who had spent 2 months managing her guilt about a moment she hadn't handled well. "Sonia," she took both my hands. "You look like yourself tonight." "I am myself tonight," I said. "Maybe more than usual." She squeezed my hands and held them a moment longer than a standard greeting required. It was her apology, and I accepted it as such without making her say it again. We had known each other 14 years. Some things don't need to be translated into words to be understood completely. Ray shook my hand and told me the dress was striking, which was the kind of thing Ray Thornton said when he meant it, and kept quiet about when he didn't. So I took it as a genuine compliment. They found their table. I found mine, the front row this time. I had confirmed the seating with the committee 2 weeks ago. I sat down, placed my purse on the chair beside me, and opened the program booklet that June had set at each place. Community Celebration 2024, Annual Awards, Musical Performances, Remarks from Pastor Elijah, the Community Pillar Award, among others. My name in print, on the page, in the program that 300 people would hold in their hands tonight. Sonia Washington, 35 years of educational service. Community member since 1997. I read it twice. Then I set the program down and looked at the room filling up around me. At 6:30, the doors opened fully, and the evening began to move at its own pace. People arrived in the particular way of church community events. Not all at once, but in a steady accumulating flow, the parking lot filling, the sound level rising, the particular warmth of a room that knows itself and its people generating its own weather. I stayed at my table and let people come to me, which they did. Former Sunday school students, now adults with children of their own, women I had sat beside in the choir loft for years. The couple from the grief support group I had helped facilitate after my own mother passed. People I had known in this community through marriages and funerals and the ordinary sustained intimacy of belonging somewhere for a long time. At 6:53, Derek and Vanessa came through the door. I saw them before they saw me because I was already watching the entrance. Not from anxiety, from the same professional awareness I had developed in 35 years of knowing exactly where every student in a room was at any given moment. You cannot manage a space you don't observe. Vanessa came in first. She was dressed beautifully, as always, a black wrap dress, pearl earrings, hair swept back. The clipboard was in her left hand, the earpiece tucked just inside her right ear, nearly invisible. She was scanning the room with the controlled efficiency of a woman who has assigned herself a role and intends to execute it perfectly. Then her eyes found me. I was sitting in the front row in a red dress, speaking with June and her husband, and I looked exactly like a woman who had been here for an hour and had no intention of going anywhere. Vanessa's scan stopped. For exactly 2 seconds, I counted, her face held absolutely still. Then the professional composure reassembled itself, smooth and immediate, and she moved her eyes to the next point in the room. But I had seen the 2 seconds. That was enough. Derek was 2 steps behind her. He looked tired in this way he had been looking tired since September. Not the ordinary tiredness of work and responsibility, but the deeper exhaustion of a man who is carrying something he doesn't know how to put down. He was 40 years old, and he looked it tonight in a way he hadn't always. The gray at his temples that he'd inherited from his father, and that I had always thought distinguished him, looked different on this face, in this light. It looked like weather. He saw me before Vanessa reached me. His step slowed slightly. I waited. Vanessa arrived first. "Mother Sonia, I didn't realize you'd be here so early." "I've been a member here for 27 years, Vanessa," I said pleasantly. "I know what time the good events start." Something moved behind her eyes. She smiled. "Of course. It looks beautiful in here, doesn't it?" "June and her team did wonderful work," I said. "You should tell them." And then I turned to Derek, because I was not going to let Vanessa manage this exchange any longer than it had already lasted. He stepped forward and hugged me. It was a real hug. Not the performative kind, not the brief contractual contact of people who have lost the habit of each other, but a real one. His arms around my shoulders and his face ducked slightly, the way he had hugged me since he was tall enough to wrap his arms all the way around. I let myself have it for a moment. Then I stepped back and looked at him. "You look tired," I said. "I'm okay, me." "I know you are." I touched his arm once, briefly, and let him go. "Enjoy the evening." Vanessa had already moved away, clipboard consulting, earpiece touched, the business of being indispensable. Derek looked after her, then back at me, with the expression of a man standing in 2 places at once. "Me? Go be with your wife," I said. "Tonight will be fine." He didn't look entirely sure of that, but he went. The hall reached its capacity by 7 o'clock. 300 people was not a guess. The committee had counted the RSVPs and set the tables accordingly, and every seat was occupied. The room had the particular density and warmth of a space that knows it is full of the right people, the hum and laughter and overlapping conversations of a community that has been gathering in this room for decades. Pastor Elijah opened the evening at 7:15 with the particular combination of gravity and humor that had made him beloved in this church for 30 years. He made 3 people laugh out loud before the first prayer, which was, as any good pastor knows, exactly the right order of operations. The musical performances came first. The youth choir, a solo from a woman named Grace, whose voice had reduced me to tears at every event I'd heard her at for 11 years, and did again tonight without apology. Then the acknowledgments, donors, volunteers, the families of members who had passed in the preceding year. Then the awards. There were 5 Community Pillar Awards given each year, one for each decade of the church's life in this neighborhood. I was the 3rd recipient called. "Sonia Washington," Pastor Elijah said into the microphone, and his voice carried something extra in it tonight. I heard it, and I thought perhaps some people near the front heard it too, though they wouldn't have been able to say exactly what it was. The weight of a man making a correction he couldn't announce directly. 35 years of educational service to the children of this city. 27 years of membership in this community. A woman who spent her career teaching other people's children to find their voice, and who has, on more than one occasion, helped the rest of us find ours. He paused. "Please join me in honoring Sonia Washington." I stood. The applause was warm and immediate, and I let myself receive it fully, without deflection, without the slight shrinking I had spent 3 years practicing. I walked to the front of the room at my own pace. accepted the award from Pastor Elijah's hands, shook his hand, and turned to face the microphone. 300 people. The room I had helped paint. The room where I had sat, in the second row, and folded my speech into a smaller and smaller square. I found Dorothy in the fourth row. Her eyes were already bright. I found Beverly and Ray near the center, Beverly sitting forward slightly. I found Derek at a table to the left, near the middle of the room. He was looking at me with the full attention he had not given me in 3 years, and I did not know yet what was behind it. Hope, guilt, love, fear, all of those things at once in the complicated mixture that is a child who knows he has done wrong and does not yet know how to say so. I held his gaze for a moment and then moved past it. I found Vanessa standing at the back of the room, near the soundboard, clipboard held against her chest like a shield. She was watching me with a stillness that I recognized as the very specific stillness of a person who has run out of moves and is waiting to see what happens next. I set the award on the podium, put both hands on the sides of it, the way I used to stand at the whiteboard, and looked at my people. Then I began to speak. Thank you, Pastor Elijah. Thank you, Greater Faith. I have been a member of this family since 1997, and this building has been my home for 27 years. Some of you I have known longer than that. Some of you were in my classroom. Some of you married people I watched grow up. Some of you sat beside me in pews that we both know lean slightly to the left on the east side of the sanctuary, which is a structural issue I have been meaning to mention. A wave of laughter, genuine, recognizing, the laughter of a room that has been in those pews. I waited for it to settle. 3 months ago I sat in this room, in the second row, beside the window, and I listened to someone suggest, politely, publicly, carefully, that my presence in my son's life was a matter of holding on rather than belonging, that real love means knowing when to let go. The laughter was gone. The room was very still. I have thought about that a great deal since September 14th. I have thought about love and what it actually requires. I have thought about silence and what it costs. And I have thought about the particular habit that many women of my generation were taught, the habit of absorbing what is done to us and calling it grace, of making ourselves smaller and calling it wisdom, of saying nothing and calling it peace. I paused. I was a teacher for 35 years. In 35 years, I never once told a student that their silence was a virtue. I told them to speak. I told them to speak clearly, specifically, and with evidence. I told them that the truth, stated plainly, is the most powerful sentence in the English language. Tonight I am taking my own advice. The room was perfectly quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight. Some of you know that over the past several years, while I have been sitting politely and saying nothing, certain things have been happening. I will not use this evening for a full accounting. That is not what this space is for, and Pastor Elijah has already had enough surprises from me this season. A small release of laughter from several directions. Pastor Elijah, to my left, allowed himself a brief smile. But I will say this much, because the people in this room were present when something happened that should not have happened without a response, and I owe them. I owe all of you the response I didn't give in the moment. I looked at the room, all of it, every table. I have spent the last 3 years being slowly, carefully, patiently described as a problem, as someone losing her grip, as someone whose continued presence in her son's life was an inconvenience to his future. This description was circulated in this community, in conversations, in passing comments, in the careful language of concern that is sometimes used to mean something else entirely. I want to be clear about what is actually true. My voice was steady, completely steady. 35 years of standing in front of rooms full of people who needed someone to be steady had built something in me that did not shake under pressure, and tonight I was grateful for every single moment of it. I am 63 years old. I am in full possession of my faculties. I own my home. I manage my affairs. I make my own decisions, and I have documented, thoroughly, legally, with counsel, every relevant fact about my situation going back 4 years. In 2022, a legal consultation was made, without my knowledge, about the process for petitioning a court to declare me legally incapacitated. I was not ill. I was not impaired. I was inconvenient. The sound that moved through the room was not quite a gasp and not quite a murmur. It was something in between. The sound of 300 people absorbing information that reorganized what they thought they knew. I have lent $47,000 to my son over 4 years, in good faith, because I love him, and because that is what mothers do. I do not say this to shame him. I say it because it is part of the full picture, and I am done with partial pictures. I felt the room, all of it. I had spent 35 years learning to feel a room, to know when it was with you and when it was waiting and when it needed something different from what you were giving. This room was with me, completely, entirely, leaning slightly forward with me. Now, I straightened, both hands still on the sides of the podium. I said at the beginning of my remarks that I have been thinking about what love actually requires. And here is what I have concluded. After 63 years and 35 years of teaching and 3 months of very careful thinking in my kitchen at midnight, love does not require silence. Love does not require smallness. Love does not require a woman to disappear gradually from her own life so that someone else's plans have more room. And real love, the kind that actually lasts, the kind that means something, does not ask you to let go of your dignity in exchange for belonging. The stillness in the room had changed texture. It was not the stillness of discomfort anymore. It was the stillness of recognition, the deep cellular recognition of people who have heard something true stated plainly for the first time in a long time. Dorothy was crying. She was not trying to hide it. Beverly Thornton had her hand over her mouth. Ray had his arm around her. At the table to the left, Derek was looking at his hands. Not the way he had looked at his hands at his birthday party. Not the deliberate not looking of a man choosing blindness. This was different. This was a man looking at his hands because he was trying to hold himself together, and that was the only place he knew to look. I saw it. I filed it away for later. At the back of the room, Vanessa was still standing by the soundboard. The clipboard was at her side now. Her face, that perfectly maintained, carefully constructed face, had undergone something I had not expected to see tonight. Not anger, not defiance. Something that looked, from this distance, like the first crack in a long-maintained wall. I looked at her for exactly 1 moment, not with triumph, not with cruelty, with the steady, clear regard of a woman who has finished pretending not to see what she sees. Then I looked back at the room, at my people. I was nominated for this award before any of this happened. I am grateful to receive it, and I am grateful to Pastor Elijah and this community for 27 years of belonging. I have one more thing to say, and it is this. I paused. The room breathed. Some women, I said, spend their whole lives being told to lower their voice, and they do, because they are gracious, and because they were raised right, and because they understand that not every moment is the moment. But they remember. Every woman in this room knows what I mean. We remember. We keep the record. We note the dates and the details and the exact words that were used, and we store them in a place where they do not decay. And when the moment finally comes, the right moment, the necessary moment, the moment that has been earned by everything that came before it, we do not raise our voice. I let the silence have its full weight. We raised the stakes. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds after I stepped back from the microphone. Then Dorothy stood up. She was not a dramatic person by nature. She was the quieter sister, the steadier one, the woman who processed things internally and expressed them carefully and rarely made a scene in public. She stood up in the 4th row of Greater Faith Baptist Church Fellowship Hall and started clapping, and her face was wet with tears she wasn't bothering to wipe away, and she looked at me with the full force of 57 years of sisterhood. Beverly Thornton stood up next, then Ray, then June and her husband, then the youth choir director and the woman from the grief group, and the couple who had been members longer than anyone else in the building, married 51 years, who stood up together the way they did everything, in the same moment, without discussion, like a single organism that had long since stopped needing to coordinate. By the time the applause was fully built, most of the room was on its feet. I stood at the podium and received it, not with tears. I had promised myself I would not cry tonight, not because there was anything wrong with crying, but because I had spent 3 years being seen as fragile, and I was not going to give that impression one more moment of my life. I received the applause with my chin up and my shoulders back, and my mother's earrings catching the light, and I thought, there, that is done. That is exactly done. I picked up the award from the podium, stepped back, and returned to my seat. Pastor Elijah managed the transition with the grace of a man who has presided over enough human moments to know when to let something breathe and when to move it forward. He let it breathe for exactly the right amount of time. Then he guided the evening to its next portion with the steady hand of 30 years of practice. I sat in the front row with the award in my lap and my purse at my feet and let the rest of the program wash over me. The second half of the musical performances, the final acknowledgments, the closing prayer. I did not look for Vanessa. I did not need to. Afterward, in the parking lot, standing by my car in the cold December air while people filtered out around me, Derek found me. He was alone. I did not ask where Vanessa was. I would find out later, from Dorothy, who had seen her leave during the applause, moving quickly toward the side exit with her phone already at her ear. I would find out later still from Briggs that she had called Torres that same night. But none of that was my concern anymore. Derek came across the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets and his breath clouding in the cold air, and he stopped a few feet from me and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Me? Derek. I didn't know, he said. About the lawyers, the 2022 thing. I didn't know. I looked at my son. I believed him, not entirely because I trusted his word, but because I knew him, had known him since before he could speak, and I knew the difference between the face he made when he was managing the truth and the face he made when it was simply the truth. I know you didn't, I said. That doesn't make it. He stopped, started again. I let other things happen, things I did know about. I let them happen anyway. Yes, I said. You did. He flinched slightly. I did not soften it, not because I wanted to hurt him, but because the truth, stated plainly, was the only foundation we had left to build anything on, and I was not going to compromise it for the comfort of either of us. Can we? He paused. Is there any way back from this? I looked at him for a long moment, at the boy who had grabbed me in the Houston airport at 15 years old with his whole body full of joy, at the young man who had called me from Georgia Tech at midnight his freshman year, not because anything was wrong, but because he missed the sound of my voice, at the man standing in a parking lot in the December cold, 40 years old, looking at his mother with the naked face of someone who has finally run out of places to hide from himself. I love you, I said. That doesn't change. It has never changed, and it will not change. But love and trust are two different things, and love and closeness are two different things. You have the first one. You have always had it. You will always have it. Nothing that has happened changes that. And the others? The others are going to take time, I said. Real time. Not a conversation in a parking lot, not a gesture or an apology or a good intention. Time and different choices made consistently over a long period. He nodded. He was not arguing, which told me something. The Derek who had been choosing Vanessa's comfort over my dignity for 3 years would have argued, would have found a way to make this about moving quickly toward resolution. This Derek was standing still and accepting what was true. That was something. That was the beginning of something, if he chose to let it be. I have something for you, I said. I opened my purse and took out the envelope I had placed there that afternoon, sealed, his name on the front in my handwriting. Don't open it tonight. Open it when you're ready. He took it, looked at his name on the envelope. What is it? It's a speech I wrote for your birthday, I said. 3 weeks of work. You should have heard it then. You'll hear it when the time is right. He held it carefully, both hands, the way people hold things they understand are fragile. Go home, Derek, I said. Take care of yourself. Call me when you're ready to talk. Really talk. I'll answer. He looked like he wanted to say something more. Several things, probably. But he was learning, perhaps for the first time, that the things worth saying required more than the right moment. They required the right preparation, the right ground beneath them. He nodded. He leaned forward and kissed my cheek, brief and careful. Then he walked back across the parking lot to his car. I watched his taillights until they disappeared around the corner, the same way I had watched them the morning he left for college. The same driveway, the same turning, the same corner. Different woman standing here now. Same love, doing what love does when it finally knows its own worth. Holding on and letting go at the same time, in exactly the right measure. I got in my car. I drove home. That night I sat at my kitchen table for the last time with everything laid out in front of me. The notebook, the folders, the organized record of 3 months of quiet, methodical work. I went through it page by page, not reading so much as acknowledging. Each step completed. Each piece in its place. I closed the notebook, closed the folders, stacked them neatly at the edge of the table. The kitchen was warm and quiet and entirely mine. The same 4 walls, the same window over the sink, the same burner that ran hot on the left side, the same cabinet door that stuck in humidity. 23 years of living had worn this space into the shape of my life, and no one had changed it, and no one was going to change it. I made tea, chamomile, which I only made when I was genuinely settling in for the night. I took it to the kitchen table and sat in my usual chair and let the evening be over. Outside, Atlanta was doing what it did. The late traffic on the main road 6 blocks away, a dog somewhere in the neighborhood, the particular quality of silence that a city makes when it is not quite asleep. Normal sounds, the sounds of a life proceeding on its own terms. I thought about my mother, the way I often thought about her at moments like this, the moments she would have understood without explanation. She had been a woman who worked night shifts and raised 5 children, and never once let any of us see her uncertain. Not because she was never uncertain, but because she understood the difference between what you show the world and what you save for the small hours. She had passed that knowledge to me without ever making it a lesson. It was just in the air of the house we grew up in, like the smell of her cooking and the sound of Aretha on the radio on Saturday mornings. She would have understood tonight. She would not have needed it explained. I had been told in various ways and with varying degrees of directness that my time was over, that I was taking up space, that real love meant knowing when to disappear. I had considered this carefully, with the full attention of a 63-year-old woman with 35 years of professional training in helping people understand what language actually means. And I had concluded that it was wrong. My time was not over. My time was mine. Every morning of it, every cup of tea, every crossword puzzle, every conversation with Dorothy at the corner booth, every Sunday in a pew that leaned slightly to the left, every moment of it fully, completely, unapologetically mine. I was not taking up space. I was occupying it, with intention, with history, with the full weight of a life built deliberately from the ground up, paid for in 35 years of service and 18 years of mortgage payments, and every Tuesday and Thursday evening at my dining room table, running out of energy and running on anyway, because my son needed to go to college and I was going to make sure he got there. I finished my tea. I rinsed the cup, dried it, put it back on the shelf. I turned off the kitchen light. At the door of my bedroom, I paused and looked back at the dark kitchen, at the stripe of street lamp light falling across the table where I had sat for 23 years, where I had made every decision that mattered, where I had been most completely myself. There, I thought, that's done, and that's mine. I went to bed. I slept the way my mother used to describe sleeping after a hard day. Deep and clean, she'd say, the sleep of a woman who did the work. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in mid-January, my phone rang. I was at the kitchen table with my crossword and my coffee. I looked at the screen. Derek, I answered on the second ring. Hey, me? Hey, baby. A pause, but not an uncomfortable one. The pause of someone gathering themselves to say something they've been preparing to say for a while. I read the speech, he said. I set down my pen. His voice caught. He steadied it. I don't have the right words yet. I'm working on them. I just wanted you to know I read it. I know, I said. That's enough for today. Can I come Sunday for dinner? I looked out the kitchen window at the January morning. Pale light, bare trees, a cardinal on the fence post that had been visiting every morning for 2 weeks without explanation or apology, simply arriving and being red and alive and entirely sure of its right to be there. Yes, I said. Come Sunday. I'll cook. After I hung up, I sat for a moment with my hand on the phone. Then I picked up my pen, looked down at the crossword, and found my place. 14 across, 7 letters. The quality of standing firm in difficulty. I wrote it in without hesitation. Courage. Some women don't raise their voice. They raise the stakes. And then they go home and make tea and sleep like women who know exactly who they are.